How much are we actually paid hourly? And is it above national minimum wage? This will be a divisive video. Hey everyone, and welcome to The Savvy Squaddy. In this video I'll be showing you what the hourly rate of pay is for a soldier in the British Army. To be clear though, we are not actually paid hourly, we are on a salary. There is a difference. But I think it will be a good experiment to run the numbers and see what comes out from it. It will also help put things into perspective and provide context for people by providing a better understanding of pay in the British Army in comparison to civilian street. After all, knowledge is power, and by having a better understanding of military pay, it will enable you to make more informed decisions on whether to join, leave, or stay. So firstly, before we get into numbers, let's go through the differences between being paid at an hourly rate and being paid a salary. By definition, hourly rate is the amount of money that is charged, paid, or earned for every hour worked, whilst a salary is a fixed, regular payment, typically paid on a monthly basis and often expressed as an annual sum made by an employer to an employee. So, the amount of money you make on an hourly rate is based on the amount of hours you work, whilst a salary is just a fixed sum regardless of the number of hours you work. Now, there are pros and cons to each of these. If you're paid hourly, then you are paid for each hour you work, including any hours worked over your contractual obligation. You are also not tied down to any lengthy contract and can instead leave and change jobs fairly quickly in comparison to someone on a salary. You will also get paid extra for working during public holidays like Christmas Day, etc. But employees who are paid hourly have less job security, their pay may not be as consistent and regular, and many do not get the same employee benefits that someone on a salary would receive. Whilst on a salary, your pay is regular and consistent, so it's easy to budget and plan ahead. Many salaried roles also come with benefit packages, whether that be to do with your pension, paid holiday and sick leave, flexible working hours, and salaried employees tend to be more valuable to a company, so less likely to be made redundant should that ever arise. However, there is no extra pay for working public holidays. If the company does need to cut back, they may cut your pay instead of letting you go, but you might still be required to do the same amount of work. And a big disadvantage of being paid a salary is the lack of being paid overtime. Being paid overtime is not a legal requirement, and part of being paid a salary means you work until the job is done. Not being paid overtime is not unique to the armed forces. Many civilian salaried employees do not get it, but some do. It's very dependent on the company and their policies. We are paid out of the public's pocket through taxes, not from the profits of a company. So where would our overtime pay come from? Now, there are public services that do get paid overtime, but even then, there are restrictions on these and cut-off points. But they may also instead get time off in lieu or toil, which the army do not have, but there is an equivalent which I will go on to later on. So now you know the difference between being paid at an hourly rate and a salary, and the pros and cons to each. Both are two separate methods of payment and are beneficial in their own right, depending on what you want. With this added perspective and context, you will be better equipped when applying for a job to understand whether or not you are actually getting a good deal, and you'll be in a better place to negotiate for increased employee benefits. We in the armed forces are paid a salary. There used to be a time where the monthly payment was calculated by a daily rate. Therefore, pay would fluctuate a little bit due to some months being longer than others. However, this is no longer the case. We are paid an annual salary, which is then divided into 12 equal amounts, which is our gross monthly pay. I have too often heard people try and work out how much they are paid hourly by taking the number of hours in a year and dividing that by their annual salary, which then comes in under minimum wage, and then they all shimph because they think it's shit. This is wrong. No one works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. This is literally impossible. In fact, if you take most salaried jobs in Civvy Street and did the same asinine math, they too would come in under minimum wage. But let me entertain this idea to illustrate how stupid it is, and we'll use the annual salary of a brand spanker's new private. Joe, who is an 18-year-old private, has just finished training and is now on an annual salary of £21,425. Joe is interested in seeing how much that is an hour, so he divides 8,760 hours by his salary. He then comes out with the result of £2.45p per hour. Joe is shocked. Minimum wage is £9.18. How can the army do this? This is illegal, he exclaims. He then doesn't bother to look any further and educate himself. He instead bitches, moans, and brings everyone else down around him, all because he's a idiot who doesn't want to think any harder because it hurts. Now, maybe Joe is special. Perhaps he's unique. Maybe he can work 8,760 hours a year. No problem. Well, at minimum wage, he should be getting an annual salary of £80,416.18. Well, that's just under the UK median salary of a CEO, although not sure when he'll be able to spend all that money as he's too busy working. I'm hoping from this simple illustration you'll see how stupid this method of thinking is. Joe would be very hard pressed to walk into a job with no degree, no experience, hell, barely any f***ing life skills and get paid a salary of over 80k a year. Just for some added perspective, here is the list of the lowest paid occupations in the UK in 2022. This uses a median full-time gross weekly pay, but just multiply it by 52 to get the yearly pay. Joe earns more than all of these professions, and believe it or not, he works similar hours, the evidence of which I will show you soon and will use to calculate our hourly rates. But I do understand where this incorrect method of calculation comes from. Under service law, we are to be available for duty 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But the key word there is available. We aren't actually on duty for that period. No one is. Even those on high readiness rotate through. Those who are paid at an hourly rate are paid for each hour they actually work, not for every hour they are available to work. They could be available all f***ing day, but they don't work all day, so they don't get paid all day. Now, members of the armed forces do not have contracts of employment, and much of the law that governs civilian employment does not cover serving personnel. But notice how it says much and not all, and that is important for what I'm going to go on to next. As I was doing my research for this video, I was reading through JSP 760, which covers leave and other types of absences, and I came across this interesting line which piqued my curiosity. It says, and I can show you this because it's on the Gov website, from the 1st of April 2009, service personnel are entitled to 5.6 weeks annual leave under the Working Time Regulations, WTR, equivalent to 28 days annual leave per year. Now, we actually get 38 days paid leave each year, but that's not the point. What piqued my interest was the Working Time Regulations and footnote number 6. In this footnote there is a link to the DIN providing more information on this regulation and how it affects serving personnel. Unfortunately, the link no longer works, but a quick search on Defence Connect gave me the most up-to-date version. But because this is on the intranet, I'm not going to show it here on the public internet. But I will put the name of the DIN on screen now so you can search it for yourself. It is worth a read because you could use it to hold your commanders accountable and also to avoid falling foul to it as well. So, what is the Working Time Regulation? In the simplest terms, it is a law that says you cannot work more than 48 hours per week, averaged out over a 17-week reference period. This is a law that applies to both civilian and military personnel. However, there are some exceptions for members of the armed forces. After all, wars aren't 9 till 5. Operations, military aid, training exercises and guard duty are some examples of exceptions. For a detailed list, read the DIN. There are some other great gems in there that will be good to know for yourself, especially if you're a manager. If the exceptions are not applicable, then this regulation must be adhered to, even in the armed forces. Now, it's 48 hours a week averaged out over a 17-week reference period. So yes, some weeks could see you work 60 plus hours, but others might see you work 30 or less. But for the majority of us, our day-to-day job does not see us work more than 48 hours a week. A statement I can back up with further evidence in the form of the Continuous Working Patterns Survey. Every year, the MOD sends a survey out to thousands of serving personnel, and they are to track and record the number of hours spent at work, on call, on breaks, and off duty over a 7-day period. So, this survey, which was published in September 2022, says that the average time spent working in the Army is 43.3 hours a week. Now, on-duty time is 63.6 hours a week, but remember, being available to work is not the same as actually working. People being paid an hourly rate don't get paid for that time, so to make the comparison fair, neither do we. Especially because most of you spend that time with your hand down your pants, watching Netflix or playing games in your grot-infested room. We can even see a breakdown of hours worked with regards to rank, and as you should expect, the higher the rank, the more hours worked. Weirdly, a lot of juniors oddly believe that as they get promoted, they do less work. But being paid more money to do less work doesn't really make sense. As you promote, you might do less manual labour, but with that promotion comes a bunch of new roles and responsibilities that often entail longer working hours, hence the pay rise. The MOD even used this survey to calculate hourly pay to make sure they remain competitive in the employment market. If the pay was shit, then people wouldn't join. They then used the results in tandem with the Armed Forces Pay Review Body to decide on annual pay increases. They do this by dividing the annual salary of the lowest private by 365 to get the daily rate, and then multiplying that by 7 to get the weekly rate. They then divide this by the average weekly hours worked to calculate the hourly rate. So with that in mind, £21,425 divided by 365 days equals £58.70p per day. Then multiply this by 7 to get the weekly amount, and that will give us £410.90p a week. Now divide this by the average weekly hours worked in the army, which is 43.3, and we come out with £9.49p per hour. The current national minimum wage is £9.18 per hour. Now, I can already hear in the comments that national living wage is currently £9.50, and so we're not even paid a living wage. But that rate of pay only applies to 23-year-olds and over. Considering in the 12 months leading up to the end of September 2021, 51% of people joining the regular forces were under 20 and 83.3% were under 24, the vast majority of new privates would come under the national minimum wage and not the national living wage. And some of you may even point out that recruits have an annual salary of £16,844, which, using the method above, would come in less than national minimum wage at £7.46 per hour. However, this rate of pay only lasts 24 weeks and recruits are in training for a job, so they will never be paid the same wage as someone who has completed their basic training. You can also equate phase 1 and 2 training like being an apprentice. Now, the British Army is one of the largest employers of apprenticeships in the UK, but the minimum wage for an apprentice is £4.81 an hour. Even if that apprentice is over 19 years old, they still come under that minimum wage for the first year in their apprenticeship. Now, not all jobs in the army require or have apprenticeships, but a large portion do, and we are paid well above minimum wage for that. Never mind the fact that the level of disposable income for recruits and young privates is well in excess to their civilian counterparts on similar pay. And disposable income at the end of the day is what matters, as that is the amount you can actually spend to keep up your poor consumer habits. Here is a table showing each rank in the army and their hourly rate of pay using the correct method. For ease, I've just used supplement 1 and increment level 1 for each rank. My own rate is £15.04p per hour worked. Now, some weeks I do work long hours, and that is where my money is earned, but they are offset by some pretty buckshy weeks as well. The MOD is legally exempt from the minimum wage legislation, but it does try to honour and abide by it to allow the most junior soldiers a livable income. I mean, if you're serving, be honest with yourself. How many hours do you actually work in the week? Do you get late starts on a Monday, sports afternoon on a Wednesday, early finish on a Friday, multiple coffee and smoke breaks during the day, extended lunch periods because there isn't much going on? I get that some of these benefits are unit specific, but I hope I'm getting my point across and you can now understand we are actually paid above national minimum wage. For the majority of the year, day to day is like a 9 to 5. Yes, we do have the odd duty here and there, a number of exercises per year, and the odd operation, as and when that rotation comes around, but that is part of being in the military, and those aspects are accounted for in our benefits and our pay in the form of the X Factor edition. Because the reality is, whilst these are aspects of being in the military, they're not factors that affect us every day of the year. Now, early in the video I mentioned that the army does have a sort of equivalent to time off in lieu, and that is known as stand down. You might often hear the rumour that a CEO can give 4 or 5 days a year off to their troops absolutely free. This is true, but there is no actual limit to how many times they can do this in a year. The limitation is that the stand down period has to be less than a week. As per JSP 760, stand down will usually be awarded as compensation for periods of intensive activity in which personnel have worked longer hours than normally expected over an extended period. It may also be awarded in recognition of consistent effort, such as following a successful exercise. So whilst we don't get paid overtime, there is provisions for CEOs to grant stand down, which is separate from the annual leave allowance to award people for their hard work. Now, in my 5 years in my old unit before I transferred, I think we had 2 or 3 of these. My new job, however, my chain of command fully understands the benefit of using this management tool, and I have had quite a few this year. In fact, I am currently writing this script during stand down granted to me upon my recent return from working overseas. It does say at the discretion of the CEO, but obviously this responsibility can be delegated down to commanders who are much more aware of the hard work and hours put in by members of their team, and I think this is a greatly underappreciated management tool. So hopefully now you understand what our equivalent hourly rate is based upon actual, factual data available to everyone. If you are watching and you are in the other services, then use your equivalent data that can be found on the survey to figure out your rate. But what is important to consider is you cannot just look at the hourly rate and call it a day. The armed forces have many financial benefits not available to civilians: longer paid holiday and sick leave, a non-contributory pension, subsidised food and accommodation, and many more, which all lead to a greater amount of disposable income, which is what we all care about at the end of the day. How much money do I actually have to spend? The national minimum wage does increase next year and will then be above the hourly rate of the lowest level private, but equally the Armed Forces Pay Review Body will then come out with their recommendation by how much our pay should increase next year, which could then see it rise above minimum wage again. So whilst there might be instances where the pay does come under national minimum wage, when actually considered with all the other financial benefits available to us, we are much better off than those actually on minimum wage. To suggest otherwise, in my opinion, is just willful ignorance and undermines those who are really struggling to get by. Did you learn something from this? Did you realise that the working time regulations still apply to us? Have I changed your mind, or do you still disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. If you liked what you just saw, please hit the subscribe button up there, and if you want to see some more videos, click over there. See you soon.